Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on this Generac 420cc engine. I recently pulled off a generator that I got for only $100. I had to swap the engine because this one had a fatal problem. The casting that actually holds the rocker shaft in place broke right off. And like this, there was no way this engine was going to run. So, luckily Generac does sell a replacement head. Unfortunately, they're asking about $350 plus tax and shipping. So yeah, I wasn't about to do that. So I made the decision to put this on a shelf and just wait for a parts engine so that I could make this one complete. The thing is though, this is just a Honda clone. And there's lots of different makes and models that this engine goes by. So I ended up instead doing a quick search on Amazon and think I found the exact replacement. The big difference is this one was only $109. So that made a lot more sense than buying the OEM part. And at the end of the day, these are both clone parts, and clearly it's not worth spending the extra money on the OEM part given what happened here. So today's goal is to get this engine back up and running again. So let me get you set up a little bit better and get going on this. Well, in theory, this should be a pretty quick video. All we need to do is remove the carb, the tins around the head, pull the head bolts, and this head will come right off. We'll put the new one on, button everything back up, and this thing should be good to go. That said, though, there is one little complication, and that has to do with the broken rocker. This shaft was retained by a circlip on each side, and this one broke off. When I initially got this machine and took the valve cover off, I did pluck out, I would say, half a circlip, but I haven't found the rest of it. So, unfortunately, I wasn't the first one to take the valve cover off after this damage happened. So I don't know if the prior guy already fished that stuff out, or potentially it went down the oil drain and is now in the sump. So, I think we're going to have to at least pull the engine cover and inspect for the missing parts. Either way, the head has to come off. So let's start there. Actually, we'll just get this out of the way. I need to get this rocker out of the way because this head bolt, you can't get a straight shot on it. The rocker is interfering. So we'll get the snap ring off, and this rocker should slide right out of place. hung up. Yeah, the studs aren't going to allow this to come off, so we do have to remove the blower housing before the head will lift off. I'm not really sure why this is full of oil. I guess it's better than water, but it does have me wondering why we have that oil up there, and potentially that could explain why the rocker broke. You know, if this had oil or really any liquid in it, you know, that can't be compressed. You know, so likely the engine would have locked up, but the camshaft would have been trying to open that rocker. I'm not sure. The bore, though, looks to be in really good condition, so I don't think we're going to have any issues there. Let's take a look at the head. So the top of the head actually looks to be in pretty good shape. I don't see any evidence that the valves were damaged or struck the piston. So I'm still not sure really what caused this damage. I guess my initial thought was quality control, but now I'm thinking that is not the case, because after I took this head off, I set it down and took a look at the push rods that I just pulled out and realized that one of the push rods is actually bent, the one here on the left. And there's really only one reason that can happen, and that is a stuck valve. So if this valve was stuck and the push rod tried to open the valve, what would happen instead is that the push rod would bend and push up until something broke. In this case, the casting broke on the head. So, you know, I guess the question is, why was this valve stuck? You know, I already checked it in the last video. Neither valve is stuck, both open just fine. And I actually just shined a light in here to see if the valve guide had moved out, which can happen during overheating, and that is not the case. The guide seems to be in place. So my best guess is that potentially this engine was overheated. And I say that because it is stained pretty dark in here. And the generator that this came off of, and even the outside of this engine, looks brand new. So I'm thinking maybe it was overheated and that caused the valve to stick. And even the smell, when I first opened this up, smelled a little bit like burnt oil. So, you know, I do have some concern that the bottom end might be damaged. You know, the only way to know for sure is to take it all apart and measure every part up. But I think it would be faster just to put the new head on and start the engine and see what it sounds like. So, you know, that is the plan. But before I do that, you know, we need to find the missing snap ring parts. So I am going to get the engine cover off. We'll take a look around and see if we can't find the missing parts. And before we can pull the cover, I do need to drain the oil. Now the oil that's in here, it's actually new oil. You know, I didn't want to store this with the oil that was in there originally. So in the last video, I drained it out. It was pretty dark, maybe a little low, but extremely thick. Anyway, I'm just going to use the fluid extractor to suck out most of this, and then we'll just tilt the engine back so that any remaining oil stays in there when the cover's removed. And you can see how dark that oil was that was originally in there. It's pretty bad. Ball bearings, though, feel good. Governor seems to work. And the counterbalance weight kind of fell out, I think, when the cover was coming off, because if this had been like this before I opened it, the dipper would be broken, and that's actually intact. So, yeah, I mean, besides the bad oil, things are looking pretty good in here, but I don't actually see the clips anywhere. So I'm just going to clean this out real quick, maybe fish around a little bit with a magnet. And actually, we can probably take the cam out. That'll give us a little bit better view in case it's hiding in the back. So yeah, let's mop this out. See if we can't find that missing part. So I just finished going through everything, at least the first round, and most of the sludge is gone at this point. But the one thing I have not found are the missing pieces to that snap ring. And the more I think about it, I'd say it is very unlikely that it ended up in the bottom end. It would have had to go through that tiny little middle hole right there, which, those pieces could have. But given the way that it broke, I'm not sure it actually broke. Potentially the guy before me just didn't have snap ring pliers. Maybe he snipped, each side off to get that broken rocker out. Anyway, I think I'm going to move on. I can't find those pieces. So, we're going to get the old gasket material off, probably do another round of cleaning, and I think we'll be good to get this thing back together. Yeah, I'm not too worried about the debris that got into the cover. I'm going to wash this out with soap and water. The engine, though, I am not. There's really no need to take that connecting rod out. And the piston, you know, the oil, at the end of the day, was oil, at least at one point. And we got most of that out. So I think, you know, that should be good enough. So we're at the point where I think we can get this back together, but I do want to get the lifters out. Just take a look at them, make sure they don't require any cleaning. And the intake one looks to be in fair condition. Let's take a look at the exhaust. And that one is stuck solid. So that is very interesting. There we go. Yeah, I'm not sure that would bend a push rod. You know, it would just hold the valve open. So yeah, it actually moves fine now. So yeah, I'm not sure if this was heat related or just related to the bad oil. But something definitely affected the exhaust side of this engine. But the lifter looks pretty much perfect. And now that it's broken free, it also moves without any issue. Anyway, I'm going to get a bit of assembly lube on here. We'll get both the lifters back in and get this engine closed up. I'm just going to get a little bit of oil all over everything. You know, I did not use any degreaser on the crankshaft or the connecting rod. But a little extra good oil can't hurt. All right, the timing mark is right there. And on the camshaft, it corresponds with that one right there. So let's actually get a little oil on here first, because I did clean most of it off. And there we go. And for the counterbalance shaft, I do have to rotate the engine a bit for that timing mark. Which is right there. So we're just about ready to get the head on. I need to clean up the mating surface. We get the old head gasket off. And it feels like it's coming off pretty clean, but we do still have a bit that needs to be cleaned up. Now that is kind of interesting. But actually normal. I think it just looked a little odd because this is so oversized, but I'm pretty sure the new head gasket looks the same way. And this is the head gasket we're going to use. It is labeled for a GX390, not a 420cc engine, but when comparing this one to the old one, they're the same as far as, well, really everything goes. But the most important dimension is the diameter right here of the bore. So let's get the locating pins back in. Yeah, not the best fitting head gasket I've ever had. I just say that because the ring, a little bit off center down here in the bottom, kind of right side. So when we go to, I guess, torque this, I'm going to have to hold it kind of up to center it just a little bit better. And same thing on this head. We have to remove the rockers to get these bottom head bolts in. So this one's a little bit, I'd say, better designed. There's no snap rings, at least on this side. There's only this plate in the middle that keeps the shafts in place. So if we remove this bolt, get the bracket out of the way, we can slide these right out. That is a pretty loose and stretched out snap ring. I'm not sure if I trust that. Let me check the other one. Yeah, neither one's great, but this one I would say is quite a bit worse. So I'm actually going to steal the snap ring off the other head and swap that out. Yeah, and that's how it's supposed to be. So that's a much better fit. I don't think that's going to fall off. And even this one, it's stretched out a bit. I think someone got a little bit overzealous at the factory putting these snap rings on. So I'm going to swap that one out as well. I think that bracket went like that. Gonna put a little bit of thread locker on the bolt. You know, anytime you have a small bolt like that inside an engine, you should use a bit of thread locker. So the head also came with a new set of push rods. I'm not sure I can use them though, because when comparing to the old ones on top, you know, I've aligned these ends right here, but if you look on the right side, you can see the new push rod is a little bit longer, and it doesn't seem like a lot, but that is going to affect the geometry a bit, and it might make it so that we can't actually adjust the valves properly with the amount of adjustment we have. So I'm going to try fitting one of the new ones. We'll see if we can get the clearance set, and based on that, we'll have to make a decision. I forgot these Hemi heads have pretty strong springs. So let's cheat a little. Just back out the adjuster as much as we can. Looks like it's bottomed out there. And we actually have rotator caps too that have to go on there. So let's throw those on first, and we'll try to get that push rod in place. And actually, I'm just going to pull this adjuster out completely, because when I go to push it down, really what gets me is that thing stabbing my hand. All right, so that is out. Yeah, I don't think this push rod's going to fit. I mean, there's no adjustment because we have the adjuster out, so it's as close as it can get to the valve, and you can see how high that is sticking up. It's almost to the back surface here. So Yeah, let's skip this. I don't think that's going to work. I'm going to grab the good push rod from the original head, and we'll see if that fits in here. Yeah, and that one's a lot better. We're actually at the bottom of the rocker instead of the top with this push rod. So this one should go in, or at least it has a better chance. Yeah, and it's in. It's loose. Let's get the adjuster back. Yeah, and this one's perfect. Right now we're at 0 clearance, and the adjuster screw, it's pretty much centered. And if we back it up a bit, we get valve lash. So we need another push rod like that. So I did take apart one of these engines, I think last year, and I saved the parts, hoping I still have the push rods for that engine. So I'm going to get this push rod back out, make a trip to the storage locker, and see if I can find a matching set. Might be in there, possibly in here. You got a piston, valve cover for a Hemi. And there are a couple here. Let's get those out, see what size they are. And no, they're too short. The one we're aiming for is this one right here. You can see these are actually quite a bit shorter. So let's grab the other bin. Hopefully we have something better in there. Got a camshaft. And I'm not seeing any more push rods. I know I have some more. Potentially, they're back in the shop. Oh, there's something here. A little bit dirty. Nope, that one's too short. Oh, here we go. Got a bag of push rods here. So this one, yeah, that one is perfect. And we only have one, but that's okay, because we only need one. So yeah, let's get this one back. I think that is going to solve our problem. Okay, so I'm back with the push rod we just grabbed from the storage locker. Let's get the original one back in, I guess, on the exhaust. And then we'll try fitting the one from that storage bin. Yeah, and they're both pretty good. So We need to set the clearance on these. It should be 0.6 of an inch for the intake and 8 on the exhaust. All right, 6 feels decent. And a 7 does not fit. I'm going to recheck that once we tighten the lock nut, because it will change a little bit. Eight feels good. And a 9 does not fit. So let's snug these up and double check. Six felt a little loose, and so does the 7. So we're going to have to adjust this again, and it's pretty normal. The screw in the middle didn't turn, but what happens is when you turn this lock nut, when you tighten it up, it takes out the play in the threads, and that changes the clearance. So it actually loosened up in this case. So let's actually maybe aim for a 5. A snug 5. Now the 5 feels a little loose. 6 is pretty good. I think that's spot on. And a 7 does not fit. Let's check the exhaust. Eight's a little tight. And 7 feels good. So we're kind of splitting hairs at this point. It is plus or minus 1/1000th. And we're probably at a 7.5. And I mean, the 8 does fit. Just a little bit more drag than I'd like. 9 does not fit. So yeah, I'm happy enough. Yeah, these valves, they're good. So I've got the push rods in, the gaps are adjusted properly, and I went to rotate the engine and realized we have a problem. The engine actually binds up when trying to open the intake valve. And at first I thought maybe the valve was hitting the piston, which actually doesn't make sense because on the intake stroke, the piston should be going down. And in this case, it's about halfway down the bore. So something else is preventing this from opening all the way. And initially I was thinking maybe we just had a different cam than what this head is meant to have, and it's just trying to open the valve more than it should. But I double checked the spring as far as like the diameter of the wire, and I also checked the distance from the top of the valve to the head and compared that to this one over here, and those measurements match exactly. The problem is actually between the valve spring retainer and the valve stem seal. They're making contact. So because of that, we can't advance any further. So yeah, now I'm wondering, was the original head like that as well? Because if I kept going, it would put a lot of pressure right here. So I don't know the answer to that, but I did remove the OEM spring as well as the retainer. And I'm thinking, let's install this. Let's see if that fixes our problem. You know, potentially this has a lower profile valve stem seal, although it looks pretty standard, but we'll double check that as well. Unfortunately though, we have to take the new head off, and put this spring and retainer in the other one's place to see if that's going to make any difference. So I'm kind of at a loss here. I measured up both these spring retainers. This is from the new engine, and we're at 0.31 inches. Do the same for the original head, and 0.31 inches. So those are identical. I also measured the distance between the top of the oil seal for the valve stem to the head, and we get 0.41 inches on the new head, and on the old head we get virtually the same, actually a little bit worse, 0.43 inches. And then if I measure from the valve, top of the valve, to the head, we have 1.17 inches. Do the same on the old, 1.16. So really all these dimensions seem to be the same. The valve spring heights are the same. The thickness of the wire is the same. They're both 0.10 inches. And I even compared the rockers just to make sure the pivot point was in the same spot. And they are a perfect match. So I think the problem here is that the camshaft in this engine, it has too much lift for either one of these heads. And like that, it was putting too much pressure, and that's what blew this casting out. So yeah, unfortunately, we're kind of dead in the water here. I'm not sure the direction to take this, but I do have a couple camshafts back in the storage locker. So I'm going to grab those, measure those up, and compare them to the one that's in this engine. And if we're lucky, one of them has less lift than what's in there right now. So unfortunately, I've got the engine back open and the camshaft has been pulled out. So let's just measure these lobes real quick before going to the storage locker. Starting with the exhaust, which felt fine. The engine rotated. That's at 1.25 inches. And the intake, that was the one that was tight, measures at 1.27. So yeah, the intake has more lift by about 20 thousandths of an inch. And that's why the engine's binding. It's too much for that type of head. So yeah, let's take a trip to the storage locker and hopefully we can find one that will work with this engine. So I just made a quick trip to the storage locker and grabbed the other two cams that I have. But these are not going to help the situation. The intake on this cam is 1.29 inches, and the one over here is actually the same. So if I were to install either of these, it would actually make the problem worse. So I'm kind of at a loss on how to fix this problem. It just seems like the cam isn't matched properly for the head. Really, the only two options or three options we have would be to grind the valve with a machine that I don't have, unless you count sandpaper. It's probably not a good idea. We could also modify the oil seal or eliminate it. Eliminating it would solve the problem, but the engine would likely smoke, And I'm not really sure how we can modify this. We can't really shave any off the top or bottom, or else we're going to lose the spring. And yeah, it's just going to fall off. So there is one other possibility, and that is to modify the retainer so that it doesn't come down quite as far as it does. And that I am concerned about, because this is what holds the valve and keeps it from falling into the engine. And this retainer, it is tapered to hold the keepers in place. It's actually the spring tension that does that. But I think we can modify this a bit. And this is actually the one from the bad head. So, if we ruin it, it's not a big deal. But if we sand maybe 10 thousandths off of this, I'm willing to bet that it would still work as designed. So it's worth a shot. So I'm going to do that, and we'll reinstall the valve kind of like we just did, and just see if things look safe. And let's just get a more exact measurement on the starting point. So we're at 0.3295, and I think we want to take off about 10 thousandths. So 0.3195, I would say at a minimum, if not more. Yeah. And we're right there. So that's just over 10 thousandths of an inch of material that has been removed. So let's test fitting the valve with the keepers and see if it looks secure. Yeah, actually, we could probably take a little more off. I don't see those keepers poking through at all, and it's still locking onto the valve pretty well. So yeah, I'm going to go a little bit more. I'm probably not going to record it, and I'm going to do the same actually for the other spring retainer for the exhaust. I'm not going to take off quite as much, but I think it would be prudent to take off just a bit while we're here. So, well, all I can say is it didn't work. So shaving the retainer caps made no difference, but I did get out the more precise caliper. The old spring is 0.106 inches, and the new one, 0.115. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but that is the difference we're talking about. So if I compress the new spring as far as it will go and take a measurement, it's actually about 10 to maybe 13 thousandths more than the old spring. So right there, we're at it was 0.78. It says 0.7775. We'll just round that up to 0.78. And if I take the original spring and compress that fully, which is right there, we get 0.67. So that is the difference right there. About 10 thousandths. So I'm going to get the old springs on the new head, and I'll report back. Hopefully this works. So we're going to find out here in a minute if this is the last time I'm going to have to take this head off. I'm hoping it is, because I'm kind of running out of ideas on how to make this work. So by running with the original springs, we're gaining 11 thousandths, which is not a lot. But I'm hoping that that's all we need. All right, so I'm going to snug this down so that there's no clearance. So that's kind of the worst case scenario, but even at worst case scenario, the engine should rotate. All right, so right there, there's no valve lash on either valve. Let's rotate the engine. Exhaust valve feels good. Uh-oh. No, actually the intake feels good too. Yeah, they're good. So I'm going to reset these valves to 6 and 8, and then we can finally move on. Five is loose, and 6 feels pretty good. So let's do the exhaust. We'll set it to 8 thousandths. All right, 7 fits pretty well. How about an 8? Yeah, 8 feels pretty good. And a 9 doesn't fit. So the valves are set. We just need to add the retainer. And I think we're at the point where we can finally close this up. So we're not quite done yet with the head. We do need to install the new studs for the carburetor. The kit came with new studs for that, as well as the exhaust, but I don't think I'm going to use these because the carb studs, they are quite a bit longer. And I guess depending upon what kind of airbox you use, this could be a problem. So I know these, the shorter ones that came on the old head should work. So we'll get those installed, and it's also going to be a similar problem actually on the exhaust side. It came with new studs, but there's a section that has no thread, and the flange for the exhaust, it's actually thinner than the unthreaded area, so there's going to be no way to tighten that exhaust down to the head, so we'll use the original ones instead. And we'll get the gasket on for now, but I'm going to hold off installing the carburetor. I don't know if that carb is any good. So in a second, we'll drop the bowl and have a look. All right, let's have a look. Carb feels empty, so that is a good sign. There is no fuel in it. And the bolt, it's actually spotless, so there is a good chance that the carb is fine. You know, likely it wasn't retired for a bad carb, given what happened up in the head. I guess the thing is we just don't know how long ago that happened. But yeah, that is spotless. And yeah, that carb is absolutely spotless, almost new inside. So I'm going to run through that passage real quick, the main jet, and I think I'm just going to put it back together. This carb should run just fine. Well, the plug that was in there, I believe works, but it is a torch plug number, and I think it would be better replacing it with an NGK. So I actually used my last brand new BPR 6CS this morning, so I've got some new ones on the way. But for now, we'll run with this one. I'm sure it's going to be a lot better than what was in there. So why do you suppose there is duct tape on here? Feels like it's whole underneath. Yeah. Nothing wrong with the handle, although it is, I guess, a little droopy. We can fix that. Yeah, I just pulled it out further, and I think it's a bigger problem than not enough spring tension. It actually seems like the spring might be broken. Interesting. It's actually locked in a little bit on the starter cup. There we go. And there's absolutely nothing. So that is a problem if we want to start it. So I'm going to cut this knot off. We'll try winding it up. But I have a feeling we're going to have to pull the bolt and see kind of what's going on with that spring. So the cord is fairly new looking, although it is actually pretty short. It's only about 3 feet long. So I kind of doubt it's the original. Let's see what's going on in here. And usually, I was going to say, usually I don't take those apart because, well, the spring unwinds. So I actually wasn't expecting that. It felt like there was absolutely no spring tension when I was trying to wind it up. So I don't see anything obviously wrong with the spring, at least where it grabs on the outside. The inside does look a little bit damaged, and it's actually not clear what it hooks on. It just might be the bolt, actually, that I pulled out of there. So, getting these back in can definitely try your patience a bit. So this, it looks like it got bent out. If you look here, there's a notch where I think the inner spring is supposed to be held in place. And without that, you know, you can wind this all you want. It's never going to build any spring tension. So I'm going to try to bend this back in shape. I'm not sure if the metal's going to let me or just snap off, but it's definitely worth a try. So the metal is actually starting to tear in this area, so rather than trying to bend that back, it's just going to snap. So we'll cut that off, get some clean metal, and then we need to put a sharp bend right about there. And this has a chance of working again. All right, let's try that. Yeah, I think that's going to work. Beautiful. So the way that spring was broken like that, that I would say usually happens when a rope is too short. You hit the end of the rope, you keep pulling, and something is going to buckle. So I'm going to put a new line on, one that is more than long enough. Actually, I might shorten that just a bit. Yeah, definitely not factory. You don't need a nut, although I suppose it doesn't hurt. Perfect. All right, so we get this back on. And I guess I should clarify too, having a short rope isn't gonna break the spring by itself, but it might break the recoil. And in this case, I think he shortened the rope, so the spring may have been clocked too tight. And then if you pull the spring, or the rope, increasing that spring tension to the point where, it's too tight, that's where you start bending things. So I'm going to back off the spring tension a little bit. There's no reason to run at full speed for the first start. So at this point, we are pretty much ready. I just need to connect the fuel. The engine has been refilled with oil. So let's give it some fuel. See what we get. All right, let's give this a try. Ignition's on, fuel is on. And the choke, it's actually missing the choke plate, so I'm not sure it's going to start without that, but let's give it a try. No, I think it needs a little bit of help. So I'll give it a couple squirts. And let's see if that'll get it started. So I was a little worried about this. You know, we repaired the obvious damage, but we had no knowledge as to the condition of the bottom end. All we knew is that the oil was really thick and dark, that it had a burnt smell, and we had damage up on the head. And one of the lifters was stuck. It was the exhaust lifter. So something happened to this machine. You know, I thought for a second I figured it out, but I'm still kind of wondering really what happened here. Anyway, it is running again. This can be used on other machines in the future. And the Amazon head, although it was a bit of work to get it to function like it should, you know, we did get there. But it did cost me in time. It took me about, I would say, 3 hours to figure out this problem. And I'm glad I did, because buying the OEM part, it was not an option. You know, the price I gave earlier was actually wrong. You know, I went to the parts site I normally order from, and they wanted, I think, close to $475 for just the head. And this entire machine working with a generator isn't even worth that. So this was really the only viable option. And as luck would have it, it worked out fine. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.